Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 7. Now just remember, we're still at the supper table. Jesus was invited to a leading Pharisee, so a religious elite. Dude's got money, dude's got power, dude's got privilege. From just about everywhere. Even the Romans don't really mess with the Pharisees, unless they need to be dropped down a notch or two. And they were interrupted, and Jesus healed the guy. So they're already on alert. And Jesus starts to notice the guests. He stops and watches the people coming in. I like to do that myself. I like to watch people sometimes, especially on Christmas Eve, going to the mall when I've already done my shopping. I know that's not very nice, but I like to watch people because I know I see some of you there.
That's me.
Yeah. But he watches them, and everybody's trying to get the best places at the table. And Jesus says to them, when someone invites you to a feast, a wedding feast even, do not sit in the best place, because it could happen that someone more important than you has already been invited, and your host who has invited both of you would have to come and say, let him have the right place. Then you'll be embarrassed and have to sit in the lowest place. Instead, when you're invited, go and start by sitting in the lowest place so that your host can say to you, come up here. This is a better place for you to sit. This will bring you honor in the presence of all the other guests. Everyone who makes himself will be great will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be great. And I've had a season of this the past couple of weeks where God's been just encouraging me in humility. That sounds very arrogant to say, I get it. But he's been encouraging me in humility. We shouldn't be the ones that are always putting ourselves forward as the solution to all problems, because we're not. And isn't it great when someone else comes to you and says, oh, thank you for doing what you do. Just appreciate you. Because that's what he's talking about here. We don't need to be the one looking for the best place. Trust God. And Proverbs says, if you see a man who is skilled at what he does, or a woman that's skilled at what she does, and it's connecting with the Lord, he'll promote them. He'll bring them to great places, even before kings. Of course, my first thought is the Apostle Paul, who was brought before kings in chains, but he was brought before to a place where he preached to kings. He preached to all kinds of nobility. People he shouldn't have contact with. Roman centurions, soldiers. And God did that. These are, by the way, the table manners that Jesus describes. First thing, when you're at a table, humility. Walking in humility. And he wants to raise you up if you're walking that way. God exalts the humble, but it's the reverse for the proud. And you might be going, yeah, but it doesn't look like that in our country right now. No, it might not, but trust God, and that's the way he works. And then he turns and looks to the host, and he says, when you give a lunch or a dinner, don't just invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, because they'll always invite you back. And in this way, you'll be paid for what you did. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And you'll be blessed because they can't pay you back. And this is hard in a place like here, because there's an attitude in Eau Claire that, and Calvin and Mattawa, I don't want to be beholden to anybody. But we're called to bless people. We're called to, especially when they don't have the chance to pay us back. We're called to do that. Right here. And then it says, God will repay you on the day that good people rise from death. You know, that's a long time to wait for a paycheck. But it's worth it. Wouldn't it be great where God says, oh, I saw that. I saw the way you took that person in and you gave them a meal and just provided for them. We're talking basic hospitality here. Or part of Hope Awaits, this is a verse for Hope Awaits too, because they deal with people that aren't going to pay you back. but you can pour into their lives. Just a case of water. And that's one of the ways that we can do that. So table manners, part 2. And then a man sitting there, when he heard this, he said to Jesus, "Oh, how happy are those who will sit down at the feast in the kingdom of God." I don't know who it was that said it. It sounds like a Peterish thing to say, because Peter tends to put his foot in his mouth. This person doesn't know it. He thinks he's sounding smart, but Jesus is going to call him on it. And Jesus said, "Well, there was once a man who was giving a great feast, and he invited many people. When it was time for the feast, he sent his servant to tell his guests, 'Come, everything's ready.' But they all began one by one to give excuses. The first one told his servant, 'Well, I bought a field, so I must go and look at it. Please accept my apologies.' Another one said, 'I have bought 5 pairs of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please accept my apologies.' And another one said, 'Well, I just got married, and because of that, I can't come.' Whether that's because of his wife or because he wanted to be with his wife, we're not entirely sure, but it could be an excuse. He's actually blaming his wife. 'Yeah, my wife won't let me come.' But that's a double excuse. And the servant went back to his master, and the master of the servant said to this, 'Hurry out to the streets and the alleys of the town. Bring back the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And his servant said, 'Well, we did it.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go to the country roads. There's still space. Go to the lanes. Go to get the poor folk in the country. I want my house to be filled. I tell you that none of those men who were invited will taste my dinner.'" There is a very, very clear message here. God doesn't accept excuses. God does not accept our excuses. This is a very challenging message to our society. I've preached it before, but since we're going through the Gospel of Luke, we should just read it again. And I actually wrote down the differences between some of these different things. There's like 3 different types of excuses here. One is pleasure and leisure. Because the guy bought a field and he just wants to go check it out, have a stroll. I just want to have my pleasure. I gotta, the kids are playing sports. I want to go fishing today. There's lots of things. And that's not an excuse for God. Now, this isn't just talking about church, but it's opportunity to serve him. We have opportunities to serve him. But this is, when I'm thinking like of this, a banquet, a wedding feast, it reminds me of a gathering. What do we do regularly? We gather every week, multiple times. There's a chance to gather. But we can't be skipping it for pleasure. The second one is work. He's got 5 yoke of oxen. He's got to test them out. It's not just like his car. He's got a 5 ox powered car. That sounds more like a truck. 5 ox power.
10.
10, that's right. 10 ox power. Yeah, dual
tires.
Yeah, so all that, dual plow. I'm going to be working hard. No, work is not an excuse here either. We should be making time for gathering. Now, there are some people that have to work on a Sunday, but there are still opportunities to gather. There are other opportunities. In fact, tonight, we're the ones hosting campfire service. So it's here again. But not next week. Next week, Monsieur Frank is hosting next week. And then after that, Marshall's hosting the week after that. And then we'll probably be back at Mars and Patsy's back around that time. And then, maybe down over at where Gabe and Ann is, like where Gabe's family lives at the Mattawa River Resort. There's places to go. And we can gather differently. So it's
yeah, they by the beach.
There's opportunities. There's opportunities to gather. And work shouldn't be one of the ones that just gets in the way all the time. If you're working so much that you can't make it to a single gathering, you're just working too much. So work is another one that can't be here. And then the third one, this is a hard one, family. Jesus is actually going to continue on and saying, as we go on, you have to love Jesus first. You have to love Jesus more than your son or daughter. You have to love Jesus more than your spouse. That's not an easy call. Anyone who's ever read C.S. Lewis's small little weird dream called the Great Divorce. It exposes all these different things. And people that decide, well, I don't really want to make it in heaven because I loved this too much. It could be their politics. It could be their business. It could be their philosophy. It could be their religion. But family is amongst it. So God, and notice the guy, he doesn't excuse them. They all say, well, I make my apologies. Please apologize me. And he doesn't. He doesn't say that. We need to be careful when we're following Jesus. He doesn't make excuses. Well, what about grace, brother? Grace is the power to do what Jesus has asked us to do, not just to forgive us for what we're not doing. A lot of people have grace completely messed up because they say grace is God forgiving me for what I'm, missing out on, what I'm not doing. No, grace is the power for you to actually do what Jesus wants us to do on this earth. That's what grace is. That's why it's so amazing. He saves me, and then he wants to work through me? Seriously? And you? Well, I understand for some of you, but that God wants to work through you. And others, it's like, God's going to work through them? Wow, that's awesome. And then he goes off and he says, I want you to go into the highways and compel people. Get whoever. And this is one of my biggest concerns when it comes to a lot of people that come to church sometimes, and they're just coming to church, that they might miss out if God did a move and they were away for like the summer. We're getting close to summer. This is the time of season where I get on edge a little bit. Everyone in my family knows I get a little bit on edge. Why? Because some people take Jesus off as if it was a coat. We don't need coats in the summertime, do we? Most of the time. Because now it's all about summer and me. And that is a dangerous place to be, because you might come back and you might miss that God did something. Wouldn't that be tragic? I would think it'd be tragic if all of a sudden God showed up in a fun, miraculous way. Or all of a sudden we have all these people coming to Jesus and they're totally messed up and they need help. We don't have people around to help them. And God's not going to be like, yeah, I still have people here. And he invites all these people. Go to the highways, go to the byways, bring them in, compel them. I want to put out a disclaimer for the next part. These are not my words. These are Jesus' words. Okay? When we're talking about these are not my words, these are Jesus' words. Jesus does not make excuses for people. He told the parable. It's not my words. We have to follow him. Carrying on, it doesn't get easier. It says, once, when large crowds of people were going along with Jesus, he turned and said to them. This is what a lot of pastors want, is large crowds of people following them. We're trained in this. Isn't this a good thing? And he turns and says, whoever comes to me cannot be my disciple unless he loves me more than he loves his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and his sisters, and himself as well. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. If you see with someone sitting down planning to build a tower, he sits first and works out what it will cost to see if he has enough money to finish the job. Might not in the current environment, because things have gotten expensive. If he doesn't, he will not be able to finish the tower after laying the foundation, and all who will see what happened will laugh at him. And this is the man who started but can't finish. If a king goes out with 10,000 men to fight another king who comes out with 20,000, he'll first sit down and decide if he's strong enough to face that other king. If he isn't, he'll send messengers to meet the other king and ask for terms of peace while he's still a long way off. In the same way, concluded Jesus, none of you can be my disciple unless he gives up everything he has. Salt is good, but if salt loses its saltiness, there is no way to make it salty again. It is good for nothing. It is no good for the soil or for the manure heap. It is thrown away. Listen then, if you have ears. Now remember, he's talking to a crowd. That's why he says this. And what he's really saying is, when you hear that, listen those who have ears, or hear with those that have ears. What he's saying is, listen and take part. It's like saying, listen and take action. It's not just listen once, listen twice. Go about your merry way. That's not what Jesus is saying. It's like, this is a serious choice. This is not a way to build your ministry, by the way. Think about it. He's not making it easy. This is not a way to build a simple church or a seeker-sensitive environment. Some of you might be going, what's seeker-sensitive? Well, we make church super comfortable for everyone who comes in. The thing is then people just consume at different churches and go, well, I like this church better because they use hymn books. I like this church better because they have a coffee bar. I like this church better because they have a nice carpet. I like this church better because it has nice air conditioning. Programs can be that way. And we become consumers of the Word of God. We have just gotten through a pandemic, and suddenly a lot of churches realize, wow, we don't have a lot of participants. We had a lot of consumers. And a lot of the consumers still aren't even back yet in many churches. They're still watching from home. But there's a cost. And there are people that even recently, you can go back as far as 70, 80 years ago, where there are people that talked about the cost of discipleship. One of them who actually wrote about this the most was a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He actually wrote a book called Costly, talking about costly grace versus cheap grace. Cheap grace makes it sound like it's, cheap wine. It kind of maybe comes out of a box, as opposed to the fine aged wine that's been in the cellar for, and it's a good vintage. And with the cheap grace, there was no cost involved. Do you know how he died? He died weeks before Hitler because he was trying to get rid of him in Germany. He could have stayed in the United States, and his friends were mad at him because he went back to Germany. He didn't get to get married. He lived in prison for a lot of his time. A lot of people distrusted him because he's a Christian, and he stood up to the government in a nice way. He didn't stand up by being rude, but he did it, and there is a cost involved. And one thing that we should know about, one thing we do know about in Northern Ontario is salt. It's not the season for it, but we understand salt, don't we? How many people have their vehicles rusting out because of the salt? A lot of hands shoot up. Replacing parts.
Woohoo!
Yes. Because that's the kind of salt he's talking about. It's not good for the table anymore. It's no good. The only thing that you can do with salt like that is throw it on the road. And this time here, they don't have the snow thing. Because, salt will melt the snow, right? That's why we throw it out there. It's not good for anything else. It's not even the type of salt that you can feed like your deer lick. It's just toxic. And that's what he's saying, is if we lose that saltiness, that devotion unto Jesus, we don't want to be the people that are good for nothing. The men who made the excuses before had lost their salt. This is all one story. It's all tied together. It's all one. Luke has put them all together for a reason. So we can understand that we're not to be doing that kind of thing. We're supposed to be all out for Jesus. One of my favorite scenes from a TV show, it's kind of funny because our family's watched Gilmore Girls I don't know how many times. I was like, Pastor Jed, you watched Gilmore Girls? Yes, I have. Several times. And there's one scene where there's a character, and his name is Luke, and he's been pining for the main character, Lorelai, for years, and they're finally together, and they're at their first actual date together, and he says to her, I'm in. I am all in. That needs to be our attitudes for Jesus Christ. Because there actually isn't anything else. So I'm in. I'm all in. Now, what does that mean in our individual lives? Where you sense God saying, this habit, that's not me. Let it go. This place here, you didn't think that you were going to be in this place for this long, but I want you to stay further. I want you to stay in this place further. Other people, I need you to move to here to reach those people. We're to be soldiers. Soldiers don't get to choose their orders. That's a picture that's used a lot in the New Testament and the Old Testament. We don't get to choose our orders. We get to follow our captain. But what a captain he is. He is the best captain ever. And I've studied military history. And I thought today, it's June 5th. I could have preached a message on D-Day. But no, before you get to D-Day, you've got to be in. all in.